Okay, so we're going to talk about cognition. So I guess first we should define cognition, right? So cognition is all the mental activities associated with thinking, knowing, remembering, and communicating. Basically, it's everything that's happening inside your brain that's like not necessarily chemical, but it's more thought based. And cognition is important because it is a reality to us, even if it's not like an objective reality. So, um, cognition is characterized by concepts, which are mental groupings of similar objects, events, ideas, or people, and both of those allow us to communicate with others. So, this is a common depiction of the chair problem, right? Like, what is a chair? You have to have a concept, a mental image of a chair, and then adjust it for each new chair that you have. So, one of the best ways to look at metacognition, or basically any way to look at cognition, is metacognition, which is an awareness and understanding of one's own thought processes. So it's weird because you're like using the mind to study the mind. But metacognition can be really helpful for other things. It basically means introspection, looking at your strengths and weaknesses and using that to your advantage. So when we're using our brains, our thought, our cognition, you often unconsciously categorize things, and categorizing allows us to more easily understand the world. We do this by forming a prototype. So, a prototype is a mental image of the best example of a category. So, for example, here, if people are shown a face that was 70% Caucasian, see how it kind of transfers from Caucasian on this side to Asian on this side. People tended to classify this face as more Caucasian than it was. So they'd be shown this face, but they categorize it as this face. That shows that there's a prototype. Another good example is for babies growing up. This was me, and this is my dog Murphy. Since I had a lab growing up, Murphy was a yellow lab. My prototype of a dog is a yellow lab. Like, that's what I think of when I think of a dog. It's basically your best example of something. So this guy named Robert Sternberg was pretty interested in metacognition and cognition, and specifically about creativity. And he believed that creativity has 5 components. The first is expertise. The next is imaginative thinking skills, then a venturesome personality, intrinsic motivation, and a creative environment. And you need creativity to make jokes like this cartoon. You need it to think of new solutions to problems, all that kind of stuff. Which begs the question, how do we solve problems? So, problem solving is usually solved by a system of either trial and error, an algorithm, which is a step-by-step procedure, like I do this, then I do this, I brush my teeth, then I wash my face, then I leave the house, or an insight, a sudden realization of a problem's solutions. Instead of using those things, which is a little bit harder, we can also use heuristics. And heuristics are more simple thinking strategies, which we've kind of talked about before in perception. It allows us to make judgments and solve problems efficiently, even though sometimes it commits some errors. So a heuristic is kind of like a rule of thumb for how to solve a problem. For example, if you say, I lost my watch, someone else might say, retrace your steps. Or you might say, okay, what time should I leave to be at the gym at 4? You have to work backwards, right? You have to say, okay, it takes me 20 minutes to get to the gym and I have to change, and so maybe I should leave at 3:30. Wolfgang Kohler is known for this problem-solving strategy of insight. He demonstrated that humans are not the only creatures to display insight, which is like the sudden realization of a way to solve a problem. Chimpanzees can do the same. So what he did was hung a banana on the ceiling and gave chimpanzees a room with some boxes, and the chimpanzee would demonstrate insight by piling the boxes on top of each other. There are some pitfalls to problem solving. One is having a mental set, which is a tendency to approach a problem in a particular way, often one that has been successful in the past. So We usually go for comfort other than unpleasantness. And then this is a demonstration of a mental set where people keep falling into this crevasse. It didn't work again. Yeah, but the theory should work, right? So we don't change things as much as maybe we should. So here is a picture of 6 matches. I would like you to mentally transform this into 4 equilateral triangles. Perhaps you should pause while you think of this because I'm going to show you the answer on the next slide. So this is the solution, and that's really hard because you have to break the 2D image here and make it into 3D. So if you had trouble with this, which I also did, you just experienced fixation, also known as functional fixedness. In cognition, this is the inability to see a problem from a new perspective because we're so locked in our own thinking. One kind of example or tangent of this is called the anchoring bias, which is the tendency to rely too heavily on the first piece of information that we see and judge everything else according to that. So for example, if we see that something was originally $1,000 and now it's $250 and it's 75% off, we're going to be like, wow, that's so cheap. But if something just was $250, you'd be like, that's freaking expensive. Same here, right? So premium is $2.99 a month. But they suggest $14.99 a month, which is still like pretty expensive, but framing it against the $2.95, that feels really reasonable. Another type of bias, which we talked about in sociology, was confirmation bias. We often seek evidence for our ideas rather than against them. So it turns out confirmation bias means exactly what I expected it to mean. And we see this a whole heck of a lot with Trump, with politics, with flat earther theories, all that good stuff. There's also a couple of other biases. So hindsight bias, saying I knew it all along. That's the overestimating the ability to predict an outcome, which could not have been predicted. So maybe you hear that a friend gets divorced and you say, oh, I knew that they would get divorced. Like, no, you didn't, but now you feel like you did. Also representative bias, which is unintentional stereotyping. The classic teachers live at school because you don't see them anywhere else, and then it's like super jarring when you see them in the grocery store. We also have a couple of other biases. Intuition is one, fast, automatic thoughts that are not reasoned. It's kind of like gut. And overconfidence, the tendency to be more confident than correct. So we overestimate our accuracy based on how confident we are, even if we're incorrect. Then we go back to the representativeness heuristic, which we talked about in sociology. This is estimating the likelihood of events in terms of how well they seem to represent or match particular prototypes. That can lead us to ignore other relevant information. So like this guy, he has tattoos, therefore he must be a criminal, right? He fits that prototype. There's also the availability heuristic, which is estimating the likelihood of events based on their availability and memory. So like if you've watched Shark Week recently, you might be more afraid of sharks. You might be wondering what the difference is. Representativeness is based on stereotypes and prototypes, whereas availability is based on like recent experiences. There's also belief perseverance, so we tend to cling to our beliefs even if people prove them wrong, which is like the whole point of fake news. So here, like, I'm sorry, Jeannie, your answer was correct, but Kevin shouted his incorrect answer over yours, so he gets the point. Also, framing, the way an issue is posed or how it is worded can significantly affect decisions and judgment. So, for example, calling it gun safety instead of gun control will have wildly different reactions. And then this is just kind of like a comparison. So an algorithm is a methodological rule or procedure. It guarantees a solution, but it takes time. A heuristic is a simple thinking shortcut, lets us act quickly and efficiently, but we're at risk for error. Insight is a sudden aha reaction, which is instantaneous, but we can't like cause it. It's not up to us. Confirmation bias, tendency to search for support for our own views, which lets us quickly recognize supporting evidence but doesn't let us see contradictory evidence. Fixation, we can't see problems from a new angle, which focuses thinking on familiar solutions, which is faster, but it hurts creative problem solving. Intuition, which is fast, automatic feelings and thoughts. That's based on our experience, which is huge and adaptive, but it can lead us to overfeel and underthink. Overconfidence overestimates the accuracy of our beliefs and judgments, which allows us to make easy decisions but puts us at risk for errors. Belief perseverance, ignoring evidence that proves our beliefs are wrong. It supports our enduring beliefs but closes our mind to new ideas. Framing, wording a question or statement so that it evokes a desired response. This can influence others' decisions, but it can be misleading. And creativity, which is the ability to innovate, produce new insights, but might distract from structured routine work. So there you have it.